We would like to welcome our editor-publisher as faculty to this webinar, Mr. Dilip Raghavan. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a part of a new initiative that we at Paint India are taking to be more visibly present in the face of our industry leaders, our industry patrons, and our industry participants, and try to be of more use to the industry beyond the existing basket of services that we already have. So today is a good start to make because the subject is very topical, timely, and it's something that people have been asking me about. I get a lot of individual one-to-one communication on this particular subject, where, as we all know, there is an influx of many new entrants into this particular industry, many of them being large format players. And this particular trend has been met with a sense of course, excitement on the one side, but also a bit of anxiety, a bit of uncertainty. So we thought we'd try and do an objective narrative on what exactly this might mean for our industry going ahead. So over the next 40 minutes or 45 minutes, I'll try and take you through some kind of a narrative. And once we have gone through that, the floor is going to be open for question and answers for all of you to it's an interactive session, so please feel free to chat to drop your questions into the question and answer tab that's there as a feature. I'll try and take as many questions as I can, the relevant ones, bearing in mind the time constraints that we might face. So this is not a one-off. We will be coming in front of you, say, every 15 days or so, and trying to cover various relevant subjects of note and of relevance to our industry. The next one already that we have ordained is to try and capture the trends in inorganic growth and mergers and acquisitions. That's for the future. For the moment, let's try and focus on the subject for today, the entry of large players and its impact on the Indian paint and coatings industry. As I said, this is a part of our endeavor to transcend into a new phase of our journey from mere market leadership, which we enjoy, be it our journal or our exhibition, and we would like to position ourselves as thought leaders and make ourselves fuse to the industry on this count as well. So the agenda for today, first let's try and understand what exactly are we talking of when we talk of the entry and the growth of the large players. Who are these players? How are they growing? And why have they made this particular entry into this paint industry? Of course, the important part is what impact is it going to have on the paint industry? And I've tried to break it down into the impact on large players, the impact on MSME players, the impact on the raw material industry, and of course, the impact on the equipment industry, all of whom are stakeholders. I might not have actually segmented it into this particular format, but these are the points that we'll be covering. Strategies for MSME success and growth. So one of the big concerns has been what it would mean for the MSME industry. So we'll do a bit of deep dive into that. And as I said, at the end of it, we hope to have some kind of, not make it just a narrative from my end and an imposition of my thoughts, but I'll feel free to invite comments and also take questions from all of you. So let's get straight into it. So the entry and growth of large players. Who are these players? How are they making their presence felt in the industry, and why are they actually doing it? So first things first, it's not contrary to perception. It's not just the new players who are coming in. There are the incumbents. Okay, the Asian Paints. I'm not making this a comprehensive narrative in terms of the names that I take, but I'll just throw in a few examples. Please don't take it at face value. These are just examples that I'm trying to highlight. So you have the Asian Paints, you have the Axos, you have the Nerolacs, you have the Burgers, all of whom are in expansion mode. Not only them, the MSME industry is also in expansion mode. So along the way, during my narrative today, I will be highlighting how, contrary to perception, it is not only the large players who are in expansion mode and who are growing, but the MSME industry is an integral part of this journey. So, as I said, you have these large players who are currently growing. You have whom I would like to refer to as the rising stars, who are successfully making this journey or this leap from being MSMEs or let's say tier two players in the past in terms of scale. Now they're making the jump into the big league, the Indigo Paints and the Kamdhenus of the world. And of course, what's got everyone excited, peaked, the new entrants. You got JSW, you got Grasim, you got JK, you even have Astral and the likes. So these are the players, this is the landscape that we're talking of. Now, how are they actually growing? So when you talk of expansions of existing facilities, or you could be talking of greenfield sites that many companies are setting up, there are also acquisitions, strategic alliances, JVs that companies are forming. So, be it Astral's acquisition, phase-wise acquisition of GEM, be it JK's phase-wise acquisition of Acro, be it incumbent players. You even have the big players acquiring small players. You're talking of Nippon acquiring Indocoat. Then, of course, you're talking of these big players setting up mighty plans. The plans are well documented. They're there for all of us to see. You're also talking of PE and VC funds for the first time investing into our industry, which is again a very, very healthy trend. And of course, many companies are looking at the Circas of the world are also looking at taking the IPO route to fund their growth. So who we've covered, how we have covered. Let's look at why this is actually happening. And I think this is perhaps the most important part of it. So one thing is, when you talk of some of these large format players being listed companies, let's try and understand these are companies with very, very successful companies. They have free cash flows. They're being guided by the best financial minds out there. And they're, of course, brutally focused on investor returns. So the very fact that they're choosing to invest into this industry, of course, they have multiple avenues, multiple geographical avenues, multiple segmental avenues. But the fact that they're choosing to invest into this industry and into this geography, which we all belong to, I think is a matter of not only pride, but it's a validation of where we are and the fact that we're doing very, very well for ourselves. Why are they doing this? One more reason is we have to look at the phenomenon of adjacencies. So you would have somebody like a JSW who's already a leading player in steel. So they're looking at it as a function of a captive consumption for their own products. And they're looking at building their portfolio in, let's say, the building material or the construction segment. Likewise for Grasim, who's a leader in cement. Likewise for Astral, who's a leader in pipes. So the mega trend that we're looking at is they're looking at construction as a macro theme, and they think paint being such an integral part of this, they would like to position their business, position their companies as somebody who's servicing the construction industry rather than individual verticals that constitute construction. The most important part in this particular thing, which is why I've highlighted it, is the market potential. Now, everything that I have said so far, let's put it into the context of the fact that everyone is in this business to grow. Okay, when you put into a new business or when you invest into an existing business or into a new business, everyone is looking at a particular growth path for themselves. Now, also, as I said, these are companies that are being that have commitments to shareholders, both internal, external, public. They're being guided, they're listed companies, so of course the commitment levels and the pressures are even higher. They're being guided by the right people who have done due diligence, in an ample format. The fact that all of them still look at the potential in this paint industry, whom some of us would sometimes like to believe is nearing saturation, I think it's a great validation and a great endorsement of the market potential that our industry bears. I've tried to unravel what this market potential is going ahead, but I would like to really dwell on this point. We must get a sense of security, a sense of comfort, a sense of belonging, a sense of pride in realizing that these are companies who are choosing to either enhance their existing positions in the paint industry or create new positions of strength in our industry. And this is a very, very telling statement of the potential that we see for our industry going ahead. So let me first try and capture some kind of mindset that's prevalent amongst the industry, at least taking a snapshot of it amongst all of you who are there at this particular webinar. So I would request my colleague to run a poll. So let's just get a candid answer from all. And by the way, this is anonymous, okay? Your answers are not revealed. So it's a very simple multiple choice question: yes, no, maybe, or yes, no, can't say. Is the entry and growth of large players actually good for the industry? Let's see what the common voice says. Can you please run the poll? Request you to please choose one answer and submit it. So we'll give ourselves about 20 seconds to do this, and then we'll run the answers. Just request everyone to please be a part of this. Once we have a critical mass, request the answers to be flashed on the screen. Okay, good. So we have the answers. I think there's an overwhelming response, at least on this particular webinar, that it is healthy for the industry. I must confess that, of course, this is the true answer. I will justify this later. But I think people are being a bit diplomatic about it in a public forum, because it has been met. The proportion of fear and uncertainty has been much higher than what is being reflected on this. But it's good. I'd like to believe that we have a positive and progressive set of people attending this webinar. So let's move ahead and see a few points. So the first myth, and I say make this statement based on the feedback that I've got and the concerns that have been voiced, is that the entry and growth of large players will make this an unhealthy marketplace. And the references are actually, of course, to the market, to the pricing. So let's try and go through some of these elements and see why it is not. This is a myth. It's nowhere close to the truth. So a quick look at the current market size. Okay, we are at about USD 10 billion. We've been consistently growing at about 14 to 16% over the last couple of decades, barring a few outstanding and underwhelming years. We have a per capita consumption of 4.5 kilos. The decorative to industrial coating segment is 80-20, give or take a few percentage points. And the proportion of the organized players to the MSME segment is about 70-30. This is the current scenario. Now hold that thought. These are impressive numbers. There's no doubt about it, but there is significant room for growth at the top. And the reason why I say this is, if you look at, first, let's look at the historical growth. The fact that it has grown at double digits for the last 2 decades, sustained itself, suggests a good trajectory, and there's no reason why it can't continue. Looking into the future, also, if you look at the economic macros, if you look at the fundamentals of the economics and the business scenario, the country as a whole, everything points in the right direction. The kind of tailwinds that we are facing as a country, as an economy in the global context, is phenomenally positive. The India story is exactly what I said. Whether you talk of the statesmanship, you talk of the faith, you talk of the IP regime, you talk of the prevalence of the English language, all of these are pointers in the right direction for India's sustained growth. Getting a little more specific and closer to our industry, the end-use industry's growth. Now, if you saw a news item just a few days ago, India has actually officially become the 3rd largest passenger vehicle market in the world by production. So it's overtaken Japan. It's second now only to China and the USA. So this is only one example. There are also news items which actually refers to India as the shining light in the construction industry. Now, whether that refers to infrastructure or it refers to housing, both are very, very relevant, and both are extremely closely linked to the fortunes of our paint and coatings industry as well. Value addition. Now, this is an element that I'd like to touch upon, because all the growth that you have seen, no matter how impressive it has been so far, has been largely linked to, let's say, an organic pattern of consumption. So you went from 100 housing units to 1,000, and from 1,000 to 10,000, or you went from 100 automobile units to 400 automobile units. It's just been a very linear path of paint consumption. The value unlocking in our industry has not happened. In fact, that is a subject that I will address in another webinar, but that's for the future. So I believe that it's not just the linear volume part that we're looking at, but there is a huge amount of value addition and consequently value unlocking that is waiting to happen. So I believe there is ample room at the top for us to grow. To put it in perspective, I think we all know what the global numbers are. Forget the global numbers, okay, because developed economies. But even if you look at the Asia Pacific numbers, I think for India to aspire to reach even those levels, we are talking already of a 3x growth if we want to reach Asia Pacific levels, just like that, not even factoring the tailwinds that are conducive to our growth. And then you're looking at about 7 or 8x, 6x or 7x if we have to match the global growth patterns that are there. So that's actually the room at the top. So let's be convinced that we are not talking of new entrants coming into a saturated market. There is still so much room for growth. Having established this, let's look at it more deeply and see what else this could mean. The pull effect. Now, there are a lot of let's say lacunae in our industry. There are a lot of loopholes. There are a lot of let's say underwhelming elements that are not allowing our industry to realize its full potential. I've enumerated some of them. Let me just go through it. So we're talking of policy and regulations. I think we know that our paint industry is not quite top of the pops when it comes to visibility in the government, in the eyes of the government, the ministries and the powers that be. Very often we're still categorized as a red category manufacturing industry. It's getting better, but it's still there. Education and technology, how many courses in the country are actually catering to paint in a dedicated manner? Barely any. Raw material and application technology, we still, in spite of having a $10 billion industry, which is fast growing, there are still companies who believe that it is not the right time for them to enter India. I'm talking of both the paint companies as well as the raw material and technology companies who still think there's not enough juice in the industry here. Global visibility. Again, it's significantly enhanced as an industry since the last few years, but I do not quite think the respect, the visibility, and the credit that we get is commensurate with the potential and the growth that we have been achieving. A fallout of that is the kind of investments we have been getting in the industry. I think that's also largely underwhelming. And partnering possibilities, I think these are all linked. So the point that I'm trying to make is, for a top-heavy industry like ours, on the one hand, you have the MSME industry, which is represented by associations, because let's face it, individually, these companies might not have the heft to influence policy. And you're left with 3 or 4 large individual corporations in our industry who are trying to engineer policy change. Try and understand if these big companies who are investing significantly north of a few thousand of crores into the industry, they would throw their weight behind making the policy regime conducive to our industry. They would not want to invest 10,000 crores and 8,000 crores and 3,000 crores into an industry that is categorized as a red manufacturing industry. They would not want to invest this kind of money into an industry where you do not have an adequate stream of manpower, where you do not have the kind of global credibility, where you do not have the entire raw material industry in the world lining up to invest into India, which means all of these companies, not only, I mean, of course, they will do it in their interest, but the fact that they will engineer some positive change for their own businesses, there will be a pull-on effect and a beneficial effect for our entire industry. If they're going to be getting in more raw material people to invest into India and bring latest technologies, it's not only them who's going to be the beneficiary, it's going to be the entire industry. And the sum and substance of this slide is, I believe there could be points beyond what I have written, but there is going to be a significant pull effect which is going to benefit the entire industry and not just these individual companies. Okay, so we've addressed the market, we've addressed the pull effect, but one of the biggest concerns is that there is going to be a significant price war. People have gone as far as using the term a bloodbath in the paint industry. So I would say there is no smoke without fire, so I cannot completely discount that factor. But I see this happening personally. And again, this is something that I'm sticking my neck out and saying because it's a matter of conviction and I see it happening pretty much this way going ahead. But let's look at it in a short, mid and long-term perspective. So definitely in the short term, as the paint companies who are the new entrants and the incumbents try to assert themselves, I think there will be a bit of a price war. And it's going to be a bit challenging in the short term because gaining market share, gaining that position of visibility, trying to assert themselves and show one to be, the next company on the scene. I think this is going to lead to some short-term pricing turmoils in our industry, which is not going to be very healthy. But this is short term. I am talking of literally a few months to the first year of the existence of these companies in terms of them having rolled out their active production. In the midterm, what's going to happen? Finally, what are they all in it for? What are we all in it for? Business, profitability. So I do not think this kind of pricing war is going to be sustainable. The new companies in particular are going to be questioned in terms of the kind of investments they're putting in, the kind of strategies they're adopting. In today's brutal share market, top lines, important as they are, comes second to bottom lines. So if paint companies are not going to be seen as being profitable, and this statement holds true of both the new entrants as well as the incumbents, they're going to get hammered at the stock market, and the stock market is a very, very important determinant of the strategy of any paint company. And of course, by logical extension, even those who are not publicly listed, finally, the bottom line is going to become a big determinant in their business going ahead. So I think what will happen is we will see this kind of a price war to begin with. There will be a bit of a chaos. Then a sense of equilibrium will set in and people will become more realistic about pricing. And I think we will suddenly see a collective gradual rise in pricing levels of the finished paint product, rising to fair, rational, and sustainable levels. This is something that I see happening pretty soon once the initial dust has settled. Okay, this is still the midterm. The long-term thing that I see playing out is try and understand. We're talking of US 10 billion suddenly going up dramatically. If you look at the organic and the inorganic growth that we are talking of, huge capacities coming in. There's going to be a lot of value unlocking that I spoke of that's going to be happening. Everyone is going to be fighting. I'll address that in depth later, but there is going to be a need for differentiation, a need for people to ascend the value chain. And I see a lot of value unlocking that's also going to be happening going ahead. So I actually think that as the image of the paint industry improves, as people move into a regime of value addition, I see a lot of value unlocking happening. And I think the pricing, contrary to the immediate short-term thing of being compressed, we will not only see a gradual shift from compression to fair, rational pricing, but I also see a lot of, let's say, as I said, I'm repeating myself, but a value unlocking and an increase in the average yield or the average prices compared to today's levels going ahead. Again, auguring very, very well for our industry. I must admit that these are generic statements. Now, there will be the raw material pricing and volatility to factor in, which again, largely is a function of crude and base chemicals, which are beyond our control. So all the three phenomenon that I have described above are generic statements. The raw material pricing, if it is favorable, it could accelerate the positive movement. If it is not, it could decelerate it. But the mega trend or the macro trend is going to be pretty much, I am convinced, on the lines of what I have been trying to describe. So Paint India's take on this particular matter, as I said, I would like to not just sermonize. I think we must try to stick our neck out and be held accountable for what we say. Nothing is certain, of course. It's crystal ball gazing, but our take on this is that the advent of new large players will yield further opportunities, create new markets. And when I say new markets, we are talking of a penetration into new geographies which are hitherto unexplored by our industry, into new application areas, into new substrates, into new value unlocking, which I spoke of. And all of this is not only going to benefit the large players, it's also going to benefit the MSME coatings industry and is going to give the industry an elevated status. So again, it's a small logical line we can draw in our narrative so far in terms of, is it really going to be healthy for the industry as a whole? And is it going to yield better prospects for our industry going ahead? This is my definitive take on this, and I would happily be held accountable for this in the years to come. And I believe that this is a statement that is built on conviction, on logic, and on a certain vision that I have for our industry. So having completed this particular part of my narrative, I'm also going to further say that, contrary to, this is not the end all and be all of it. I think there is still more potential for new players. We've seen only 3 or 4 new players. There are going to be many more players whom I see will come into this industry because of the kind of potential that it bears, not only in terms of end-use markets, but also in terms of the continuous growth, the profitability of this industry. Also, we must bear in mind that there is still a bit of unfulfilled potential vis-a-vis some of the global majors who are not operating in India. Most of them are here in India, but there are still significant Indian players who are not fully here in India or just not here in India. They will also eventually invest into India. So I think our industry is one of those, because that's not peculiar to India, it's a generic thing, but we are an industry which is very, very chemical intensive in its formulations, in its manufacturing, and it's not FMCG. People tend to call it FMCG. It's more slow-moving consumer durables. But if you equate it to FMCG, so we got the strength of the chemical industry on the input side where the innovation play comes in. And on the outside, you got potentially profitability margins that are, headed into FMCG domain. So it's an industry which is very, very interesting. Let's not forget that. And this is the reason why I believe that not only are we going to see this sustained growth, but this phenomenon of new players entering the Indian industry is going to sustain itself going ahead. Let's come to another important part, which is actually occupying a lot of time for me in terms of the questions. Let's answer this question threadbare. Does the entry and growth of large players mean trouble for the MSME paint industry? Let's run another little poll, please. And once again, request everyone to please participate in this. Okay, so this question has been answered in a slightly more consistent manner in terms of the feedback that I've been getting and the vibes that I've been getting. I still think there's a bit of diplomacy, but that's okay. So let's say a fair number of people actually believe, what nearly 50% of people believe that the entry of large players means trouble for the MSME paint industry. Let me run you through a few points that I have in my mind, which make me firmly believe that this is not the case. So here goes. I call it a myth, and I will tell you why, that the entry and growth of large players will be the death knell of the MSME paint industry. Far from it, my friends. That's definitely not going to be the case. So let's look at it. I mean, the charge of the big guns, we see all of them happening. So it could be an opportunity, it could be a threat, it could be a peaceful existence, or it could be something in between. So I use, before I get into something more concrete, something more tangible, let me try and slip into a bit of management jargon, but again, with some kind of logical basis. So I call it the tennis ball illustration. Some of you must have seen this. What you see very quickly in front of you is a box of tennis balls. We've all seen it as kids. And the first thing that you see is the box is packed to the rim with 3 tennis balls, and you feel this is practically full, right? I mean, there's no space in between. But what we actually, if you use mathematics to look at the empty spaces that are there, and it's there in front of all of you, this also holds good if you increase the number of balls in the space, by the way. So very quickly, let's assume the outer container to be the paint industry as a whole. The tennis balls inside are the large players who seem to dominate and take up practically all the space. But what you will see, and this is mathematically proven, is that there is actually empty spaces to a factor of 1/3, 30%, 33% is actually the empty space that is there. Try and draw parallel to our industry. The industry as a whole is the tennis ball, is the box. The large players are the tennis balls. And the opportunity gaps are what is the MSME industry. Of course, you can't, it's not a literal reflection of what the industry is, but it's a notional analogy that I'm trying to draw. Because traditionally, the MSME segment has found its mojo and has found its calling in specific geographies, in specific products, in specific applications, specific customers, which actually represent these particular gaps, which might be, once upon a time, it was completely off bounds for the large players. Now the waters are getting mixed, but by and large, it still holds good where these significant, these pockets of very specific influence are the domain by and large of the MSME segment. And of course, having said that, we must also realize that there is nothing that stops the MSME. On the one hand, the large players are treading into the MSME domain of customers and applications, but there's nothing that stops the water flowing in the other direction. The larger markets are also game for the industry, for the MSME segment to capture. So the sum and substance of this is that the opportunities that we see conventionally and assume them to be the entire universe of opportunities, there are actually enough pockets of space, influence, and opportunity for the MSME to tag on to. Another important thing, I kind of made a reference to it in my earlier slides when I spoke of the policy framework, etc., and what the big players could bring in. I call it the jungle path paradigm. What you see on the top left of your picture is a seemingly an impenetrable forest. Okay, someone would come there and say, it's inaccessible for us, let's go away. But various animals actually do that in the jungle. But along come the elephants, who are figuratively the big entrants and the incumbent large players who actually say, that's okay, I mean, I can create my own path. So what they do is they actually are able to generate this particular clearing in the forest, move ahead for themselves, they find new pastures, but they also leave behind a path for the other smaller players, for the other smaller animals in the jungle parlance, and for the MSME segment in our industry parlance to actually capitalize upon. So again, let me repeat myself. There are geographies, there are substrates, there are applications, there are customers, which our paint industry has not penetrated, or it's hugely underutilized the potential. These big companies are going to, in their own interest, unlock these areas of potential. Please try and understand, none of these big companies have invested into the paint industry thinking, here's a $10 billion industry growing 15% or growing whatever, organic growth that's there. Let me try and take 3% from this company. Let me try and take a 8% share from the MSME industry. Let me try and take 2% from this other company. If that was the only outlook that they had, believe me, they would not have invested into this industry. They clearly see a potential beyond line of sight, and this has been ordained by their leaders, who are the brightest industrial minds, and their financial advisors, who are the brightest financial minds in this industry and this country. So definitely they see a potential, and in pursuing this potential, they're going to create paths, they're going to create potential that is also going to pass on to the MSME industry as a logical follower. So, of course, having said that, on the one side, it's okay to say that there are opportunities, but please do not come back to me a few months or a few years later saying, on the 12th of January, you said the industry is also, the MSME industry is also going to survive. But listen, I've had a rough ride of it. There are nuances to this. Okay, it's not a straight path. You cannot continue doing what you did in the past, and you cannot compete with these giants on their own strength and expect to succeed. So you have to play to your own strengths. You have to define your own strengths. You have to ramp up your own strengths, and you have to play to your own strengths. If the gentleman on the right is almost invincible in terms of bulk, in terms of might, in terms of size, if the guy on the left is going to try and knock him down, I think good luck to him. But what he could actually do is use speed, use his mobility, his agility, his access, and try and compete on that front. So the point is, try and play to your own strengths. I've tried to document a few things. Again, I believe that this is potentially a subject that could be addressed in a separate webinar in depth, but we'll keep that for another day. But the key here is going to be differentiation. I already got a question. I was checking the question answer tab during the poll on what are the areas of differentiation for the MSME. There was also a question on what are the areas of differentiation for the large players. I'll address that later. But within the MSME segment, differentiation by any parameter, whatever parameter you think is going to help you survive, thrive, and grow sustainably is game. But you have to be differentiated. You cannot do the same thing that the large players do and hope to succeed. You have to have different marketing, you have to have different products, different geographies, different loyalty schemes, whatever it is. A greater thrust on R&D and innovation. You have to build your fortunes based on a value regime. You have to be differentiated in terms of your products. You have to invest. I mean, there's no point in being cynical and say, how can I afford R&D? If you think you cannot afford R&D, my friend, you're on the way to winding up or disaster. You have to invest in R&D and innovation. And please get rid of that myth in your minds that R&D and innovation are a burden on your costs. They are actually going to be the key to unlocking value for you, and they're going to be key to your very survival going ahead. Digital adoption is a great leveler, so I would strongly urge the MSME segment to use the digital platforms, to use the digital space, because that is one area where you are standing on equal terms with anyone around you. Build supplier loyalty, build customer loyalty. Of course, a lot of this is common sense, but try and understand. One thing I would also like to emphasize as a general macro trend going ahead, when these huge capacities come in, there is going to be an interesting realignment in the way supply chains are arranged. Okay, because today we are largely sitting in a buyer's market. I'm not suggesting that it's suddenly going to become a seller's market, but as these capacities come in, let's not even get into pricing for a moment, but sheer availability of raw material in a predictable manner, with forecasting itself is going to be a challenge for the paint industry. So this is going to be a good time for the MSME industries to improve their supplier practices and lock in loyalties. Likewise, for customers, make sure that your position with customers is so impregnable that no big player can come. And how that's done, you know your customer better, you know your business better, but you must build in that. Be more aware of your ecosystem. There are so many regulations that are coming in. There are so many new materials that are coming in. Draw parallels from other industries. You have to be alive to these things. If you're going to be reactive rather than proactive, you're going to be left behind in the game, my friends. And that, again, is going to be a challenge for you going ahead. Be more agile, receptive, adaptive is exactly what I said. Focus on core competencies. For the MSME in particular, you cannot say, I want to make an emulsion like an Asian Paints. I want to make an epoxy like the Kansai Nerolac. I want to make powders like Berger. That's not going to happen. You have to define your core competencies. You have to focus on what is going to be a differentiator for you. What is that one product or what is that one strategy where come what may, nobody can, beat me. I'm not going to take the name of the paint company, but I remember one of my first acquaintances in the paint industry, very old company. He used to come and tell me that we are very, very small in size, but they were masters in heat resistant paint. They are masters in heat resistant paint. He used to tell me that even the largest paint company in India will use our heat resistant paint in their operations, in their chimneys. So try and build this competitive moat, define this differentiation, and create a core competence that becomes very, very impregnable for yourself and becomes very difficult for someone to come and unseat you. Prepare for inorganic growth. Now, I already made a reference at the start of how paint companies are growing. Okay, so discard your emotions. There are opportunities for you to be buying other companies. There are opportunities for you to be selling a part of your business to others. And you have to look at it in a strategic context. Look at it in the context of your succession planning, in context of your strengths, in terms of your short-term and long-term goals. And you can always choose not to get into it. But please become investor worthy. Please become worthy of participating in this organic growth, which again I'll be speaking of mergers and acquisitions in a future webinar. We can do a deep dive. But the point I'm trying to make here is mentally, physically, operationally, culturally, become prepared, become worthy of participating in this cycle of inorganic growth, which is going to be a reality and is going to be an intensified opportunity in our paint industry. And please, for heaven's sake, remain positive. There have been a lot of events, industry events, which many of us have attended. My God, I mean, everyone, everyone is clamoring to, say how bad the industry is. When crude prices go up, the same people say, oh, the crude prices have gone up. I don't know what's going to happen to us. The same guy after a week says, oh, crude price niche gaya. I don't know what's going to happen. And the best part is these same people, I mean, again, I'm saying it, please take it, I'm saying it respectfully, I'm not getting personal, but try and understand the same companies or the same people who used to come in a scooter around driving Mercedes cars and they're still saying, Dhanda nahi chal raha hai. Something's got to give, okay? Let's be positive, let's be realistically positive, but let's have that sense of pride. Let's realize, acknowledge to ourselves and to others that this is an industry which is quite unlike other in terms of the potential. Please remain positive. Doing business negatively is not going to be easy, and even if it is, it's definitely not going to be pleasant. So let's remain positive. So the concluding take is, rather than it being a threat, we think this phenomenon of the large entrants coming in will be a boost to the MSME paint industry. Again, it's something that I could be taken to the gallows for as a statement going ahead, but I'm happy to be held against this statement a few years down the line. The peaceful coexistence and opportunities to collaborate is something that will play out before our eyes in the midterm to the long term. Again, the short term, the resilience to bear this price war that might come in and the aggression that might happen at the start, and just the multitude of unknowns that might come in are not going to be easy. You have to grind out this rough phase, but this is definitely going to help the MSME industry going ahead in the long run. On the contrary, in fact, let's go one step ahead. On the contrary, I think we will see new entrepreneurs and existing MSME players expand and invest. The caveat is this has to be based on differentiation, vision, and excellence. Exactly what I said earlier. Find your sweet spot and focus on that. Size does not always matter. Small can also be beautiful. One point that I have not mentioned here is I want to draw a parallel to two other industry segments that are there, which I work closely. Our paint industry, by all reckoning, has about 3,000, 4,000 paint companies. Okay, the top 10 companies have about 60% plus market share. Not all companies, paint companies, have brands. Some of them are also toll manufacturing. All kinds of models are in place. I would like to draw a parallel with two industries which would help me, let's say, become more positive about what I say. I'm positive, which will help me exude that positivity and rub off that positivity on all of you. The dye stuffs industry in India. There are about 2,000 manufacturers of dyes in India, but only about less than 5% of these companies, or maybe 10% at the most, actually sell dyes to end users, whether it's textile, leather, paper. They sell it as a branded product to the end user. What do the other 1900 do? They service these 100 players because they have limitations in capacity, they have limitations in their geographical spread, they have limitations, let's say, in certain very key technologies, they have limitations in certain markets. So these companies have actually forged very strategic alliances with these top companies and are helping these top companies grow while doing well for themselves. At times, very often, these smaller companies are the ones who are actually doing better for themselves because they stand to be insulated from a lot of the global turmoil that's there, because their job is to only service these companies based on certain things. So all the demand supply vagaries that are there from an end use point of view are something that the big companies deal with, and these companies are actually carving a niche for themselves and servicing this industry. I am not for a moment suggesting that this is a path that our industry should follow, but it is a live example of an outshining industry that has actually been able to survive in this manner with a large number of players. The second example that I would like to give is the cosmetics industry, and to a lesser extent also the food industry. We all know that it's dominated by the HULs of the world, the ITCs and the L'Oreals of the world. But hey, you still have a Winnie, you still have a Nika, you still have a Purple. All of these companies have formed a particular niche for themselves, whether it is in terms of marketing, it's in terms of the product, whatever it is. Go to the food industry, Kisan, okay, the ubiquitous Kisan tomato ketchup or the Maggi, but still you have a Viva that sells. Why? Because they have not gone into conventional tomato ketchup, they've not gone into conventional raspberry jam. They have gone into specialized dips for which there is still a market, which the big players perhaps are not interested, or they did not see this potential. So my point is, please keep innovating, please keep finding a niche for yourselves. And it is not only then a factor or a matter of the MSME industry surviving, but also thriving. Please allow this to drill into your heads. Okay, so as a kind of a last, before I get into winding up mode, what's the impact assessment? Just a quick two-line statement on it. The large players, the impact assessment of these big players coming into the industry, there is a clear possibility of individual market share erosion of the large players, because I believe there is going to be a lot of like-for-like competition. It's going to be similar kind of distribution models that they are chasing, similar kinds of direct marketing or institutional sales. So I think there will be a bit of market share erosion. But when you consider this as a function of, in the larger picture, when you look at the kind of market growth that we are looking as an industry, I'm just giving you numbers as an example. If you were to go from 8% to 6%, 8% of 100 versus 6% of 200, you get what I'm saying? The overall perspective is still going to be positive. Yes, the absolute numbers might drop, which is expected to happen with this kind of competitive intensity. On the positive side, I think every company is going to dig deep, look at their own product innovation, look at their own process innovation, supply chain management, and their own strategy. And every company is going to emerge stronger and have, a core defined for themselves, which will lead to a lot of good in the long run. The MSME segment, enough said. Okay, I've already spoken about it, but I am, amongst all the positivity, let me repeat a bit of a warning. If companies are not going to innovate, they are not going to carve a niche for themselves and differentiate themselves, we will see an existential crisis. There will be, whether we like it or not, we are going to see companies winding up. But these are the companies who are obstinate or just unable to innovate. This is a harsh reality, and we will see this happen in spite of all the positive things that I've said. Raw materials. Now, there is, of course, the raw material constituency that we have. What is it that it's going to mean for them? So the first thing is, of course, $10 billion of paint versus $15 billion of paint with 65 to 70% of market constitution. More material to sell, good thing. But with the competitive intensity at the top, I think again in the short run, there's going to be a lot of there are going to be price wars in the end product. which also means that there's going to be a lot of, let's say, I mean, the margins at the raw material industry and particularly with the large scale is going to be compromised in the short run. In the long run, as supply chain management, goes from mere opportunistic buy and sell, as supply chains get locked in terms of loyalty, with proper forecasting, with proper security of supplies, and with strategic supply chain alliances, I think it's going to leave the industry much richer, not only in monetary terms, but also in terms of how businesses are conducted. So I think this is going to be very, very important. It's going to lead to the whole industry, the raw material industry, rising to the occasion and becoming much more structured in its approach. This is one thing where I would like to tell the raw material industry that the role of the MSME industry is going to be very, very important in your fortunes. Because, as I said, by my own hypothesis, we have about 30% of the market at an equilibrium level still being comprised of by the MSME segment. And when you look at the kind of numbers that we are foreseeing over the next few years, 30% of those numbers are not going to be trivial. And we all know the nature of the supply chain is that your margins are actually going to come in a much bigger way. The volumes might be 30%, but I believe the margins, the bottom line of your business will be contributed to by a factor of 50 to 60% by the MSME industry. Again, happy to stick my neck out here, which means you're going to have a clear strategy for the MSME industry. You're going to have channel management, which becomes more and more important. So again, this is something that I would urge the raw material industry to be wary of. Machinery and equipment, I think it's going to be a golden run for this segment going ahead for the next 5 to 10 years. CapEx cycles are kicking in for existing companies, for the new entrants. The MSME segments and the incumbents are also going to have to revamp, refurbish, and rise to the occasion in terms of their throughput. They cannot work with suboptimal capital equipment anymore. So I think it's going to be a very, very good time for the machinery and equipment business as well. Okay, so the executive summary. Now, India's March, where, as I said, we are at, give or take a bit, we are at USD $10 billion, which has taken 120 years, which is how old our industry is. Okay, so let's, all this euphoria is there, right? I mean, we say it about the Indian economy also. We've reached $3 trillion in so many years, and we will move to 5. So it's not as if we are trying to demean the efforts of the past industry players, but this is just a phenomenon that cannot be stopped. Okay, this is how it's going to be. So we've taken 120 years to reach $10 billion, and I believe that with the kind of organic growth that we are looking at, the tailwinds that India as a country, as an economy is facing, and the entrance of the new players that is there, we are going to see the next USD 10 billion mark hit within the next 10 years, maybe sooner, but this is going to happen. And it's going to be spurred, as I said, by domestic markets, value growth, and global tailwinds. All of us, please, let's try 2 things. We have to be, so it doesn't mean everyone is going to be a winner. The winners are going to be those who are innovative, adaptive, and committed, as I've written. And the challenge is now not the market dynamics. The challenge is how equipped are you as an industry player to capitalize on this growth that we are all seeing. There are going to be players, believe me, mark my words, there are going to be companies who have the business potential at their doorstep. But because they did not take cognizance of this potential that was there, they perhaps kind of took it for granted. They're not going to be able to fulfill orders. They're not going to be able to capitalize on this potential. So please be ready to capitalize on this potential that this wonderful industry is going to offer and the value that it promises for all of you in at least the next 1 decade. I'm being very minimalistic about it. It's a clear run for at least 2 decades, but I'm saying at least this next 1 decade is going to be a very defining period for our industry. So, of course, our commitment, needless to say, we've completed as Paint India, we've completed 72 years now, marching towards 75 years and then towards our centenary celebrations also going ahead, hopefully in my lifetime. But we think, so we'd like to practice what we preach. So when you say that this potential from 10 billion to 20 billion is there, it also places a great onus on us to ensure that we enhance the levels of our service, our capabilities, our bandwidth, Because again, we cannot pretend that with the same tools, with the same resources, and with the same strategy, we can service a 20 billion industry in the manner that we serviced a 10 billion industry. So starting with the leadership to the processes to the people, we ourselves are catered to it, and we will continue to strive to serve the industry to our best ability. All the delivery mechanisms, the journals, the online media, the conferences, the market research, of course, our exhibition, all of them, we aspire and we are certain of achieving global leadership around the turn of this particular decade. So we would like to use this webinar as an opportunity to reiterate our commitment to all of you and be a committed partner in this sustained growth. So what are the little, apart from the magazine, of course, which is ubiquitous and reaching all of you every month, we have, in a matter of little less than 2 months, we have our Paint India 2023 exhibition coming up in Delhi for the first time. That's our commitment to the North Indian industry based on your feedback. It's not a business decision. It's actually a decision that has been based on the industry feedback. So we will be there and we hope to see all of you there. Powder coatings is again a segment that needs a little bit of different addressal given the different dynamics that it has as compared to the liquid paint segment. So we will have our Powder Tech conference in, you can see the details in Delhi in the end of April. And of course, Paint India 2024, it's going to be a mammoth, gargantuan, humongous exhibition because, again, of course, Paint India has become a global force to reckon with, but because of the kind of positivity that we are seeing in India, the way supply channels are being realigned globally with the China +1 policies, with the Make in India, Paint India 2024 is going to be a landmark and is going to be a big springboard in our quest to become the leading paint exhibition by 2030. So these were the little, let's say, elements or milestones that I wanted to take this opportunity to remind all of you about. The floor, ladies and gentlemen, is open for questions. I have a few questions coming in. I'm going to try and read them, but in the meantime, we continue to remain accessible to all of you 24/7/365. Our email IDs are there. Please use us as your extended partner in this journey towards success. So I'm going to start taking a few questions that are there. I will omit the names because I'm not sure. I should have clarified it at the start, but I'll omit the names of the people who are asking the question right now. Okay, do you think that there would be consolidation happening with large players acquiring the MSME players? I think we've already seen it happening. I made a few references to the live examples that are there. And definitely we see this happening. This would happen because of the need to, on the side of the large players, they would want to acquire smaller players to get geographical access. They would want market access. When I say geographical, I meant market. They would also perhaps want assets on the floor. They would also want, let's say, for the same reason that they have certain specific products, their supply channel, their market channels, their distributor channels, they might want to have. So the same things that I said, it's basically a mirror image phenomenon. The same things that I suggested that should be strengthened by the small scale, which will become desirable attributes, are the same reasons why the large companies are going to strive to acquire these smaller companies. And of course, if it's a good opportunity for the MSME player, the smaller company, to have an upside or to even continue participating in the business, which is generally the trend. It's not a buyout. It's a phased buyout generally. So I see this happening definitely. The next question is, okay, so there is a bit of a few common traits, a few common questions where the purchasing power in MSME players versus large players is highly skewed. So people have said, can you shed some light on it? How can it improve? See, I think the first thing is acceptance. Okay, there are answers to it, but I think the first thing is acceptance. A company who buys, I'm just using random numbers, 10,000 tons of emulsions versus 100 tons of emulsions versus 10 tons of emulsions versus 1,000 tons of emulsions, it's going to be different. And the paint company should not grudge that, because the same thing happens when you sell your products also. When you sell your product to, en masse, in bulk, to an offshore refinery, vis-a-vis to someone who's buying a few carboys of you, obviously there's going to be a price difference. So there has to be an acceptance that this whole phenomenon of economy of scale is going to be there. It's something that you cannot wish away, which is why I said you have to stick to your strengths. You have to differentiate. Don't end up manufacturing the same products in the same manner, selling to the same people, and subject yourself to that price disadvantage that you are definitely going to have against these people. I don't see it. There are talks of aggregation. It's a very romantic thought, but there are too many pitfalls along the way. Raw material aggregation by a consortium and all it. On paper, it's good, but it's not something that's going to happen very easily. And still, look at the scale of these big companies. I think this price arbitrage is going to continue to remain. Companies are going to have to work around it. But that's where I said build in supply chain loyalties. If you cannot meet them on the price, which is, let's say, it's going to be difficult, at least lock in supplier loyalty, where you're assured of getting that right material at a fair price, not at a lower price, but at a fair price at the time that you want it. Because timely delivery, quality, these are going to be parameters then that can be used as strengths for yourselves. Okay, so there's one question which is, okay, I could find a huge gap in the field of training. Don't you think this is, okay, so I can't get the question exactly, but I think basically they're referring to the knowledge gap that's there and the need for skilling and training. Definitely, it's a huge, huge lacuna. And in fact, I think it's going to be a bit of a glass ceiling that our industry encounters going ahead, which is where we today have some efforts made with the Paint and Coating Skill Council. Many of you are aware of it. All industry persons have come together, formed this particular skill council. We're trying our best to we're trying to introduce more skilled operators, more skilled chemists into the workforce in India. In fact, must take this opportunity that along with Paint India, we are also rolling out a few courses. I did not make a reference of it, but there will be a lot of skilling programs, and we take this opportunity to invite interested candidates, interested faculty members, and interested associations to try and set up some kind of a, let's say, a breeding ground where we can actually harbor this upskilling of our industry. It's definitely going to be a need of the hour, and our industry should take cognizance of this. Okay, there's one question which says the entry of big players will accelerate digital technology getting into digital visual technologies. Okay, it seems to be more of a comment where MSMEs must make use of this changing scenario. So I think, so one is a general comment on digital technology. I already spoke of it as being a great leveler. So I really think our industry must adopt this. It's a no-brainer. And I think a specific thing was visualization technology, which is how you visualize the painting and also. I think it's not the digital that we speak of, but visual technologies, yes, as a means of improving sales and customer experience. I think, yes, it's a definite opportunity. Somebody has asked on the challenges that equipment manufacturers could face, as they may also face stiff price competition. Okay, so this is a very specific question on equipment manufacturing. So like, it's an anonymous attendee. So, sir, madam, like any other raw material or any other consumable or any other capex component, the competition is going to be there. There are multiple suppliers, so definitely there's going to be a competition. There are Indian manufacturers, Chinese manufacturers, European manufacturers, so all kinds. Competition is going to be there. But in capex, in capital equipment, I think I would dare say a little more than raw materials. I think the opportunity to climb up the value chain is a little greater because there is the component of resource efficiency. You're talking of throughput, you're talking of electricity consumption, you're talking of services. Okay, you're talking of services during installation, services in the post-operating scenario. So these could become your differentiating factors. So competition is definitely going to be there. But if I were an equipment manufacturer, I would actually feel that there is a better chance of showcasing myself in a positive light vis-a-vis competition if you compare it to the raw material industry. Okay, why are the big MNC paint companies still not participating in our market in a big way? When will our market be ready for big MNCs which can help in pushing the technology in paint as well? I don't know if it's a fair statement to say that big MNC paint companies are still not participating in our market. I mean, if you look at the biggest paint companies in the world, Axo is already here, PPG is here by way of a JV. Yes, the Jotuns and the Nippons are there, but still, the numbers are still not commensurate with their global strength, but they're getting there. Yes, there are a few paint companies who have not yet come. There are a few paint companies who have come and who have failed. I'm not going to name them because that's not the idea, but we know. I think a bit of cultural, the knowledge of how India works is something that's paramount, that companies that enter India must come in. If it's indigenous, it's okay. But any multinational who comes in must not only understand the numeric or the technical aspect of it. I think some of the companies who failed did not read, the nuances of the Indian market well enough. So I think there is a lot of sensitization and a lot of learning, a lot of local knowledge, ears and eyes to the ground that must be invested into before any paint company comes into India. But once that is done, I think it's like the proverbial pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's always difficult to get there, but once you get there, you got the pot of gold waiting for you. Big players adopt strategy of backward integration, say emulsions or something. Will it affect MSME manufacturing? Only emulsions in the long term. Okay, it's a very product specific thing, but I think this context can be extrapolated to other products as well, and it's a macro trend that's worth analyzing. Look, I think the Indian industry, the Indian paint industry, is a little more intense in terms of backward integration. In terms of, I think it's somewhere emanates from the fact that the Indian companies are a little more cost sensitive, or the Indian marketplace is a little more cost sensitive. And strangely enough, with the kind of drive and enterprise that Indian companies have, they would like to try out a few more things and try and make it more cost effective or try and do things. But I think sometimes I think it comes at a cost, at the cost of being compromising your core competence. But okay, that's one part of the judgment. Let's leave that aside, because this is a definite trend. So I think this will happen, because as companies try to outdo each other in prices, there is going to happen. But again, I would go back to understanding the overall market. Let's say, for example, again, please take it as only a notional example. Let's say for a $10 billion industry, let's just say the market for emulsions is 1 billion. Again, it's not a scientific thing. I'm just making a random statement. And let's say 50% of the capacities are bought out. So you have 50% of 1 billion, which is the market. Let's say this goes to 60% or 65% of captive manufacturing going ahead, which means only 35% of bought out or third-party consumption. But 35, again, 50% of 10 billion versus 35% of 17 or 18 billion, it's still going to lead. So I do not see it as a threat, but I see it as a realigning of how you market your products and the customers you reach out to. Can there be more scope in contract manufacturing through tie-ups? I clearly think this is going to be a phenomenon going ahead, because companies, once they set up a critical mass with their manufacturing, for further expansions, I think they would look laterally. They would not want to go very capital intensive. They would want to focus on brand building. They would want to focus on channel management. So I think this is definitely going to happen. One thing that I've not spoken of is private labeling. So there is toll manufacturing, there's also private labeling. Once retail becomes more and more organized, making a reference to the Walmart model, you're going to have private labeling, you're going to have kiosks which sell paints, and this could actually be owned by retail outlets. So this is, and there are many examples that I can give, but this is going to be one of the examples where you'll find additional avenues of business. And again, the MSME could be in play here. Okay, where are we with time? Okay, we have time for another few questions. What would be the regulatory developments in India over 2 to 3 years as on dates? So let's first accept that and understand that the regulatory framework in the Indian paint industry is as liberal or non-existent as it can possibly be, okay, in relative terms. So we are just getting into an era where lead is now officially almost a bad word in decorative paints, at least. VOC is just kind of being thrown around, but yet not stringently implemented. You have BIS standards, you have a few things, but in terms of enforcement and in terms of laying down of standards, there's pretty much nothing on the horizon. I think this will come eventually as the markets, the markets become more homogeneous globally. We cannot afford to have different standards of life. The world is becoming a global village. There's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas, of people, of markets. So it will happen. Now, the fallout of this is that the companies who are proactive in preempting certain legislative changes that come in are the ones who will win, because normally globally you have, let's say, a phased implementation of any legislation, right? So if you want to go from 100 ppm to 10 ppm of a certain component in your product, normally in the developed world you have a 10-year phase out plan or a 10-year mitigation plan. Here in India, because there is nothing that's really happening, everyone turns a blind eye to it. Suddenly some NGO or some regulatory body wakes up and says, you have 6 months to change this. So that leads to a lot of market disruption. And this is where staying ahead of the curve in terms of understanding regulations is very, very helpful. For our industry, you would do well to look at parallel industries, look at what's happening in textiles, look at what's happening in FMCG, look at what's happening in other industries, and try and understand what is the regulatory setup that's actually there, what of it is going to be relevant to our industry, and which of it could actually become a threat or an opportunity for you to adopt and gain in business. The scope of export opportunities for the paint industry. So, as a general statement, what people tend to say is that the cost of shipping 30% or 50% of solvent or water halfway across the world is not feasible in terms of logistics, which at a common sense level makes a lot of sense. But as supply chains change, so there are two things. One is those which are very, very value intensive. If you talk of powders, you talk of certain refinished products, you talk of certain UV cured products, there is a potential for products to be exported. Likewise, there's also a threat that these products could be imported. By the way, the paint industry exports less than 1%, much less than 1% of its total production. And it imports, again, equally negligible volumes, barring some of the products that I said just now. So once you get into products, which have the kind of value and the technological input that can allow you to justify, exporting these products, that is one thing that will happen, and it's already happening. It will happen. The second thing is when you see supply chain disruption. See, India again is going to be a beacon of stability globally amongst all the turmoil, whether it's financially, politically, in any which way. So India is going to become a preferred manufacturing hub, whether it's raw materials, finished products, even the end use industries that we are talking of. So I think there could be opportunities which might be spot opportunities which will come through supply chain disruptions. So let's say one of the neighboring countries is just not able to manufacture because of energy crisis or whatever, whatever the reasons might be. I think there will be opportunities here, and I see this happening first in an ad hoc sort of way, and then going ahead even in a settled sort of way, but that might take a bit of time. Okay, so there's one question which says raw material distributors generally cater to SME requirements. How is the large paint company increasing their share going to impact? So basically the question is, will distribution get affected because of the raw material thing? So again, I go back to my good old example of the percentage might come down, but the slice, the cake is going to be much larger than what it was. So I don't think the numbers will go down. On the contrary, distributors could actually score in terms of timely deliveries, in terms of the service that they're going to be given, because again, the determinant is not only going to be price. Price is of course always going to be there. Price, credit, quality is going to be there, but timely delivery, timely service is going to be the characteristic, and I would strongly urge distribution companies to look at this as a cornerstone of their business. One question says, larger factories with more and more automation, is that the solution looking at the future, or mid-sized automatic, mid-sized semi-automatic closer to the mind? So I think I'm not able to understand it, but one reference is to automation and one reference is to being closer to where the buyers are. Yeah, so I mean, I think that it's like a bell curve. Okay, you cannot, every operation cannot be manual, but automation comes at a cost. So once you get into automation, and after a certain point, it might get over-engineered. So it has to be a fit for form, and that's something that only you can answer. But automation, yes, but with an eye on your specific operations. You cannot be looking at what your neighbor does and say, I want to do the same automation, because your scale, your products are going to be very, very important. And being close to the markets, yes, logistic costs, timely delivery, customer engagement and intimacy, this will definitely help customers. So I think this is there. Coming down to the few questions, what is the future of the powder coating MSME industry? Okay, so powder coating per se, let me answer it in two parts. I think powder coatings per se have an extremely bright future. They're very, very well placed on the legislative front. Okay, they're very, very well placed on the performance side of things. Certain industries, I think powder coatings per se has a very, very bright future. Within powder coatings, I think the MSME industry today has a much larger market share. If you look at decorative paints, for example, vis-a-vis that, the share of powder coatings in the MSME segment is a bit higher. And again, I think that's because of, it's not a typical mass production industry. You got batch changes, you got colors, you got, the dynamics of that industry are a bit different. So per se, the MSME industry is better equipped to, the structure of the powder coating industry and the nuances of it are more favorable for the MSME than, let's say, a decorative paint industry. Again, the OEM engagement or the customer engagement in the powder coating business is going to be very, very important. It's important in every industry, but understanding your raw materials, I think in the powder coating industry, understanding the dynamics of raw materials, basically raw materials means you're talking of polyesters and epoxies. I think understanding that becomes very, very important. So I think the MSME powder coatings industry must invest into understanding, market intelligence, into some kind of, systems that can allow them to stay ahead of the learning curve vis-a-vis procurement of, the pricing, the availability of polyesters, epoxies. But I think to answer your question, I think the future of powder coatings is very, very bright, and within that, so is that of the MSME powder coating industry. I must take this chance to plug in our Powder Tech conference. It's the only dedicated conference for the powder coating industry in India. It's something we're extremely proud of. It will happen on 28th April 2023 in Delhi. And it's I think one of the leading powder coating conferences, not only in India, because there are none, but one of the leading ones in the world as well. So, Okay. Why are colors not given their due credit for selling decorative paints? Color can actually be a differentiator when all paint companies are selling similar products. So I think let's first understand the science of it, and then let's understand the philosophy of it. So producing a particular color is particularly with the advent of tinting systems, is not rocket science anymore. Every company can do it as well as the other. Of course, some can do it more cost effectively, some can do it with better turnaround time. I think you get the drift of what I'm saying. But what I think is a pertinent point here, which has subconsciously been raised, is our industry should invest a little more in consumer engagement in terms of understanding colors, in terms of understanding consumer mindset, what kind of colors are customers looking at per se in a particular geography for a particular season. Because again, there's an interplay with, when you look at the decorative paint industry, you're also talking of furnishings, you're talking of different things which go into home improvement. So how can we as an industry, or how can individual industry players harness color forecasting, have a color of the month, have a color of the year, and allow that to have a positive rub off on their business? I think is something that's an opportunity that definitely is going to be latched onto by a few companies. Some are already doing it, but I think we'll see more of this. In terms of colors not being given their due credit, I don't think that's really the case. I mean, colors are given due credit. It's just the way colors, the paints are manufactured today. You can't. It's become a bit of an equalizer with printing systems in particular. Do you think MSMEs in architectural coatings have to diversify and enter into industrial coatings to find differentiating products to sustain and grow? The first comment to that is easier said than done. You can't, just because you're finding competition in decorative, you can't necessarily find diversification through industrial coatings. Again, you should be governed by the same principles. If you have to go into industrial coatings, do you find an application, a customer, a geography, a technology that is going to be conducive to your growth? If not, it's better to search for these hidden gems within your own business. So I think it's not so much of a case of powder, liquid, industrial deco, as it is a case of finding some kind of differentiation. Diversification sounds good, but it's not the easiest thing to do, because you got to assimilate a whole lot of technical inputs, a whole lot of market knowledge. Your supply chains will have to be remodified. So I'm not saying no, but it's not the most logical answer. Is the per capita consumption of paint increasing enough in India for SME paint manufacturers to grow in the context of upcoming? Yeah, so as I said, I mean, the per capita consumption is definitely growing. The market size, I remember in 2005, the paint industry was at about $1.6 billion. Today, 17 or 18 years later, it is at $10 billion. So the per capita consumption has also gone up from 700 grams to 4.5 kilos. So it's definitely increasing. The per capita consumption in the country is definitely going to increase. The market share of the big companies will marginally increase, but there's still going to be enough juice for the small companies. So I think it's a bit of a repetition, but it's worth saying that. How do we see the government funded Prakritik paints? What will be the position in India in the next 10 years? I consciously read that question, but I'm consciously going to skip the answers also, because I think right now it's a bit political. Let the performance of it speak up for itself. Okay, there's a certain product life cycle. Synthetic chemistry has its own benefits, so do natural products. Let's see how the performance actually is, and if it works well, I think everyone, it's like the natural cosmetics phenomenon. First thing, what is natural, what is not itself is a very gray area. Secondly, if it does work, I see the incumbent players who are there latching onto it because they already have the know-how and the market access. Okay, I'm going to try and take a few last questions purely in the interest of time, but I do have a repository of all these questions, and I will try to answer all of them offline. I think it's a comment or a question. Collaboration between companies on specialty coating emulsions could be a game changer for MSME or large format companies for differentiated products. So we are not going specific. I think collaboration is the name of the game, whether it's between paint company and raw material and raw material, manufacturer and distributor. I think it's a collaborative era. And I think we should not look upon any link in the supply chain or any player in an adversarial way. There are huge opportunities for collaboration, but you have to try and first identify them and then ensure that uh, tap into the potential that it holds. Okay, let me see if I can make this one of the last. The MSME industry has hugely adverse economics in the business as compared to big players and currently survive in markets left over by the big guys. Due to information arbitrage access problems, digital is going to take away the information arbitrage, MSME is one. So the MSME, this is a statement where the MSME can survive only by significantly improving cost positions. How are they going to do it? So since there was, I think a part of the answer lies in your question or in your comment where digital adoption is going to be important. If on the one side, so the information arbitrage used to work two ways. It used to work in terms of those who have their eyes and ears to the ground gained, and that was invariably the MSME. Now that has also been level, it's become a level playing field with digital. But on the other hand, if you look at digital processes, which were earlier, or the digital platforms, which were earlier proprietary systems that were controlled by the large players or created by the large players. You have public digital platforms today which become a leveler. So it's a bit of a give and take. You have lost on the one hand, but you're winning on the other. So it's the good old philosophy of nothing is created or destroyed. It only morphs from one form to another. So what was earlier a weakness has become a strength, and what is potentially a strength has now become a weakness. But where I will disagree is that it's not the leftover businesses that are taken. The leftover businesses are taken by those who do not have a niche. Then you're left with the crumbs and the leftovers. If you have a niche for yourself, you can actually stand up with the best and compete and even outdo them. Okay, I'm trying to see if there's anything. Okay, what kind of sustainability trends are we seeing in paint packaging? Okay, I do not have an immediate answer, but I really think so. When you look at sustainability in packaging, I mean, I think so. So let's look at what's happening in packaging. The packaging industry, particularly for FMCG, I'm sure some of you know the concept of EPR, which is the extended producer responsibility, which means the FMCG company, let's say a Nestle, for example, is responsible for how his final chocolate wrapper is discarded at the end of its life cycle. Now, mercifully for the paint industry, that's not so much a thing because you're talking mainly of rigid packaging, and the rigid packaging gets reused till death, till it's practically non-existent. So mercifully, that is not a consideration. But in terms of the inks that are being used, in terms of the adhesive labels that are being used, I think companies are pretty aware of what's happening, and I think that they're already doing what they have to, and they will align with trends. Maybe what I would like to add, even though that's not part of the question, is I think packaging as a form of customer engagement and customer inducement is something that could become interesting, and maybe it's something that all of us, including Paint India, should get together with the stakeholders and try to harbor this particular thing. It's a collective facelift for the paint industry also. So I think we've also come to the end of time, and I've not been able to take all questions. Please excuse me for those whom I've not been able to take. It's not been by design, but just because there's so many questions. But I thank everyone for their attention, once again, their participation. And as I said, we will try to, it's our commitment, it's our philosophy of moving from market leadership to thought leadership. It's also, let's say, exposing ourselves to the industry. We want to be held accountable for for what we do, for what we say, for what we think. And these webinars, every activity that we do is an effort in that direction. We want to be more transparent. We want to be more accessible. And we hope we can continue to enjoy your support on this one initiative as we have been doing for all of the others. So please allow me to sign off. And I must thank you for your attention and for all the support that we have been receiving from the industry. We continue to look forward to being in touch with all of you. And once again, I make a little reference to what's coming up immediately. The Paint India 2023 exhibition for the first time in Delhi in March. Hope to see you all there. And please keep your feedback going. I already have a few webinars lined up in my mind. But if there's anything that you would like us to speak on, we're just a shout away. I go back to our contact details. Me and my team are available at all possible times. Thank you. Have a good evening and look forward to being in touch. I sign off.